All right. Thank you all for coming. And I am like super excited to introduce Yael Adler. So she is gonna be our author. And so I have the book here, just so you all know that this book will be available for checkout tomorrow. It'll be on the new biography section, if you're familiar with the library and that shelf. And so I also thought that we could start, I'll start with a few questions. If anyone has a question, you can throw it in the chat or you can ask, but I'll start with the first one. So for those who haven't read your book yet, can you tell them something about the book that isn't in the blurb?
Yes, well, before I even get into that, I just want to say hello to everyone. Thank you so much for hopping on tonight. I'm so excited to share my story with you. It's National Adoption Awareness Month, so it's an extra special month and extra special time just to be sharing my story with everyone. So really happy to be here and be speaking to all of you. So for those of you who haven't read my book, I think really understanding the historical context is so significant to my adoption story. It was in the 1970s, Romania was being led by dictator Nicolae Ceausescu, and people were living in complete poverty. Romania had a large foreign debt at the time, and Ceausescu had exported all of Romania's resources. So people were living on essentially nothing. They couldn't provide for themselves. They couldn't provide for their families. Times were incredibly desperate. On top of that, Ceausescu's mission was to increase Romania's communist population. So in his efforts to do so, he banned contraceptives, he banned abortion, and he put incredibly a ton of pressure on women to conceive and have children. This made it really difficult for women to handle living in these conditions. They didn't know what to do. They were going to all sorts of extremes. They were trying to self-abort, which was incredibly dangerous. Many women died from doing this. Women were taking their children to the local orphanage, perhaps thinking that their lives would be better. People were selling their children for survival money, as one person living during that time described it. And people were also putting their children up for adoption. And it was actually in the early 90s that Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs, they put out this series of really moving broadcasts, shedding light on what was going on in Romania at the time. And that was really why there was such a spike in adoptions happening in Romania in the early 90s. So that's a little bit, just a little bit of background so that you could kind of understand what was really going on at the time, before, during, and after my adoption happened.
Thank you. Was it difficult while you were writing to decide what to include in your book and what to leave out?
I think that's a challenge that all authors probably run into. You know, what do you want to include? What do you not want to include? I think for me, there were definitely things that I intentionally left out for certain reasons. So for example, you know, I really didn't talk much about my childhood in the book. And I think I really wanted to stay focused on my adoption journey from that time that I stumbled across all of these documents and photos while I was cleaning out my mother's apartment. And, you know, it was really that time that I realized how much of my story I didn't know and how much of my story I really wanted to learn and fill in those missing pieces. But it was really that moment in time that really gave me the desire to want to explore that further. So I kind of said that, you know, this is what I'm going to focus on. I want to focus on my adoption journey really from this point and really everything that lies ahead. I think that readers can get so lost once you start talking about your childhood, and you can kind of get lost in that as well. So I didn't really touch much on that in my book. Another area that I didn't really talk about was my birth father, which I kind of wanted to do intentionally to see if anybody would notice if I didn't include him. You know, I had reasons for not including him, but I, you know, was really curious if that was something that caught the reader's attention or not. And it hasn't really come up that much, which I also find interesting. I really only got that question, one or two times, why, did you decide to contact your birth father? What's the story there? So, I definitely did leave certain things out intentionally, and tried to stay as focused as possible on my journey.
What do you hope your readers take away from reading your book?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, obviously, I hope everybody enjoyed my book. Aside from that, I hope people really take away, the pieces of identity. That was really a big thing for me. Identity, connecting with your roots, really understanding where you come from and connecting with that in some way. That was a really big part of my story. Finding out that of my gypsy roots was a huge finding for me, and what that meant, and that never really being disclosed to me, and something that I kind of learned on my own. So that was a really interesting experience for me, and very eye-opening to the life that I could have had versus what I have now. And I hope, and it's about family too, and family is a really can be a really complicated word for adoptees, because you have the family that brought you into this world, and then you have the family who raised you, who is your family. And I was really blessed and fortunate to be able to find my birth family, connect with them, but also have the support of my my family as well. And that's not something that everyone can say. So I was definitely really fortunate in that regard, and I'm grateful for that.
Thank you. Can you tell us about how you came up with the title of your book?
The title. So the title literally just fell out of my mouth one day. I was just doing research, and I was learning a little bit more about the Roma and Gypsy culture, and I was just saying to myself, wow, like Gypsy, Jersey, oh wow, I like the alliteration there. And also, how fitting is that? Because that is literally how my life evolved. I was literally born a Gypsy, and then I became a Jersey girl. So the two pieces just kind of naturally came together so well, and it just made so much sense. So it just naturally came together, I think, for me.
So you thought of it like on your own?
I did. It literally just popped into my head one day, and I was like, yes, that is it. That is the title.
That's really fun. Do you hear from your readers often, and if so, what do they typically say?
I do hear from my readers, and I have to say that is probably the most rewarding thing possible, to hear from all of you. And I love the feedback that I get. People have just reached out saying how moved they were by my story, how much it resonated with them. It's really for everyone. It's not just people in the adoption community, but also for people outside the adoption community. It's a chance for people to learn a little bit about, hear from an adoptee voice. It's also just kind of addressing that universal desire to want to know where you came from and connect with your roots. And I think that really applies to so many people. So yes, I love hearing from all my readers, and I've been hearing just such great and positive things, and I really appreciate all of your support.
That's really like really nice must be really nice to hear from them. And can you tell us about your research process for your book?
Yeah, so how it all started was really, I was helping my mother clean out her apartment to put it up for sale. And I come across all of these documents and photos, and I quickly realized that this is all things pertaining to my adoption that I'd never seen before. I saw my birth name, which was Adriana, that I never saw before. I saw details of my birth mother, my birth father, the city where I was born, medical records, just things that I have never seen before. So it was this whole treasure trove that I stumbled upon. And for some reason, I just got the urge, and I thought, I really need to track down the attorney who handled my adoption. That's like gonna just I just felt like that was really going to be the first step, like a really critical step for me to do that. And I'm so glad that I did, because it was really because of him that, you know, the series of events that happened afterwards were able to happen. And, you know, I did a quick Google search, and he was actually very easy to find. He was just right in Philadelphia, so not too far. And he purposely made himself easily available, which I thought was so incredible, that after all of these years, you know, he wanted to make himself so easily accessible in case any adoptee ever, you know, decided to look into their past and wanted to learn more. He wanted to just be like a great resource for them. So I found him online. Once I had believed to find him, I sent him an email. I was very direct in my subject line. It was, I believe you were involved in my Romanian adoption. And I wrote him this letter just explaining, you know, who I was. And while I didn't expect him to remember me and my case by any means, it was so many years ago, you know, I was just hoping that maybe he could offer some of his time and just help me learn a little bit about his experience doing adoptions at that time. You know, what was it like during Romania at that time? Just really providing some context for me and support. And he was so wonderful. He quickly replied. It was only a couple of hours. He gave me a call, and I was actually speaking to the attorney who handled my adoption 30 years ago. It was the craziest feeling ever. I was really in such shock trying to hold a conversation with him on the phone. But it was wonderful. And he offered to help me in any way that he could. And it was really because of him that I was able to speak to someone who lived in Romania during communist times, who I talk about in my book. And I was able to also connect with someone who conducted my birth family search and who also stayed with me during my time in Romania for my reunion and acted as my translator. So I really owe it all to him, because I don't know how my book would have turned out if it wasn't for connecting with him and, you know, all of the doors that he opened for me. So, you know, I'm very thankful for that. And, you know, that was really at the core of how it all started, was, you know, finding the attorney and then connecting me to all of those people. And then one thing led to another. And that's really how I ended up in Romania.
And you have like a lot of history in the book too. Was that like also that process? Was that difficult? Was that easy?
Yeah, you know, honestly, everything that I got from the book was from him. He was just, he would just tell me these stories, and it was like he remembered being in Romania as if it was last week. Like everything was so vivid to him. So we would just have, you know, so many conversations, hours and hours of conversations, where he would just tell me these stories and explain to me the history. So all of that history and all of that knowledge I really first got from him, and I later confirmed through, you know, online resources and books and things like that. But I mean, he was just so knowledgeable on the subject matter that it was so helpful to me in including all of that.
That's great. How much, if any, say, do you have in the cover creation of your book?
I was very hands-on, actually. You know, I had this concept in my head that I really wanted to portray, you know, these two very different worlds coming together. And, you know, working with Vinnie Corbo, who's my publisher, Velocil Publishing. I mean, he's just so talented, and he's such a great person in general. And he literally took my thoughts and just completely nailed it, like first round. And he presented this to me, and I was just like, yes, you got it. Like, that is exactly what I pictured in my head. So, so it was pretty incredible. He was so talented, and he really just was able to convey, you know, what I wanted so clearly and perfectly. So I'm so happy with the way it came out. And yeah, I was very hands-on in the process, which I also enjoyed.
That's wonderful, because I think a lot of authors don't get much say in the creation of their covers. So that's really nice. And now you can like look at it and know that, you know, you helped like make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it really just depends on the size of the, publishing company that you're with. The fact that Velocil Publishing is a boutique and a smaller publishing company, I think it really allows more creative freedom and, more hands-on work and things for the author, which I think is definitely a perk.
So From Gypsy to Jersey is your first book. Do you have any other projects in mind?
Yeah, so towards the end of my book, I kind of mentioned that this whole experience would really come full circle for me if and when the opportunity came that my birth family could come visit me here in the States. I think that would just be so rewarding and incredible for so many different reasons. It isn't easy for them to come here. They have to, it's a very complicated process, but I guess a part of me is just really hoping that one day that can come to fruition and they could just see my life, because my birth mother really spent so many years not knowing if I was alive, if I was healthy, if I was happy. And for her to just come and see my life, my world, my family, I think would just, it would mean a lot to her.
Would your kids, are they like super excited and hope that happens too?
You know, my kids are very little, so I've been kind of still trying to figure out what that conversation looks like with them. My oldest is 6, so she's definitely the most mature one. But I have a 3-year-old and a 9-month-old, and my kids are just very little, and I'm not really sure they're at the point yet where they could really understand, what it really fully means to be adopted, what adoption means. There's a lot of layers. It's very complex, and I think I'm probably waiting for a point where my daughter reaches a certain maturity level where we could actually really have a conversation and she could kind of absorb a little bit more of it.
If you were to publish another book, would you use the same publisher?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so happy with Velocil Publishing. It was incredible to work with Vinnie Corbo. He's so passionate about what he does, and he's passionate about all the stories and all of the authors on the label. I couldn't have lucked out, any better than working with him, because he's been great.
That's great. What was your experience like working with your editors?
Oh, my editors were fabulous. I worked, it was actually funny. So it was just through a connection that my first editor came into the picture, Carla Hulsback. She was wonderful, and she was just really passionate about my story, which made it nice to work with her. And the other editor who I brought on was actually also a part of the Velocil publishing label. She is an incredibly talented writer. I think she's written now like 4 or 5 books. She's amazing. Her name is Kathy Gigante Brown. So I worked with those 2 women, and it was great. They loved my story, and they just completely got immersed in it, and they were so helpful. They really were.
That's great. So what was the publishing process like for you?
It was pretty simple. I think because it's a boutique publishing company, it really allowed for a lot of flexibility and a really smooth process, working with Vinnie Corbo, as I mentioned. And he really, he was really just passionate about my story, and we were really able to work on it together. It felt like a team and a partnership the entire time. And it really went very smoothly. It actually didn't take me very long to write the book. It was probably, even with the trip and everything, it probably took about a year. And to get published and all of that was really just a matter of a couple of months. So it was a pretty quick process overall, I would say. But yeah, everything was very smooth, and it really worked out well.
Did you always want to be an author?
I always loved writing, and I knew pieces of my story, but none of it that really made sense. And it was never a complete full picture. So I knew that one day I was going to write a book, but I really didn't have the plans in place until I stumbled upon, all of my documents and photos pertaining to my adoption that day. It really just hit me that day. It was like, oh my God, I just came across all of this amazing stuff. Like, now is the time in my life that I'm going to make this book happen. And that's what I did. And then I just really wanted to fill in those missing pieces and get the complete story.
That's great. So I can open it up to any questions now from anyone else. If you want to shoot it in the chat box, I could ask it, or if you want to unmute yourself, feel free to do that. Sally, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you. So can you talk about the word gypsy? Because in circles I've been traveling in, I've been told that that's a derogatory term, but I know you do talk about it in the book, but for people who may not have had a chance to read it, how you came across to use it.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think everyone is going to look at that word differently. And yes, I think people have used it in a derogatory way. Also, upon my research and talking to my birth family relatives directly, I asked them, how do you feel about that word? Because I was really, cautious about that before incorporating that in the title of my book. I really wanted to know directly from the source, how do you feel about that word? And, it was relayed to me that they're actually proud to call themselves gypsy. And it's not something that they feel negatively about or ashamed about. And I loved that response so much, because they should be proud, and they shouldn't be ashamed to call themselves gypsy, because that's who they are. And that's part of their identity. And, once that was kind of communicated to me, and I read upon online a couple of other sources that had a similar context to it, I said, you know what? I'm going to include that in my title, because I love that. And nobody should be ashamed of who they are. And for people who use it in a negative light, that's on them, and that's a problem, and they shouldn't do that. But it's certainly not a negative word on its own. So that's what my experience. Yeah, thank you for asking that question.
I'd like to ask a question. Hi. I haven't finished your book yet, but I have started it, and I'm curious. You talked about your mom having another daughter and raising her by herself. And that makes me wonder about the Roma culture, and if this is like we have in part of our cultures here, very much many single mothers, mothers raising their families or kids without the support of the fathers. Did you see that there? Did you look into that?
So our living situation was very different. Monica, my birth sister, she was a half sister, so she had a different biological father. And, unfortunately, my birth mother endured a lot of physical abuse from my birth father. And both men were actually very abusive. They abused alcohol, they abused the women in the family, and the conditions it really wasn't a very safe environment. So Monica and I were actually kind of split up. She really lived with a lot of her biological father's relatives separate from us, even though she was still, under the care of Daniela and was not put up for adoption. And that was really a big part of why I was put up for adoption, was because it really was not a safe environment for me. Aside from, our house not having running water, and the fact that my birth mother really was unable to provide a lot of things for me, because times were so difficult. She also was very fearful. She was very fearful of my biological father and, him going out and drinking and coming home and abusing her. And she had spinal injuries, and it became very physically difficult for her to care for me as well, as financially and all of those other factors. So that was kind of the situation that we were found in.
That's the way you were found, but did you get a picture of the larger culture of because, the Gypsy or Roma culture is, they do travel between countries,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I don't know, I do know from my travels, often, I will see them begging, and that they have spots, that they, I don't know if they have assimilated in many countries. But as far as Romania goes, that time that you're talking about when you were born was particularly terrible for the country. But since then, they certainly still have the culture, the Roma culture. And I wondered if you saw, if it is, because it's very, from what I understand, it's really a strong clan.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. So if that's the case, then I really wonder about the way. So you said Monica, of course, went to there were relatives to help. So there was a larger village and community that took care of it. And that's what I'm really wondering, just sociologically, if when you were there and looking at it, because it's very different from the way you and I have been brought up, right? Very different.
No, absolutely. And they have very large families. My birth mother is one of 8 or 9. So yes, they have very large families, and they are a very tight-knit community. I think they're a little bit more sedentary now. I don't know that they travel as much as they did in the past. But yeah, family is definitely an integral part of their culture. I think about that a lot too with Monica, because she was raised as an only child, never knowing about me. And, an only child for her was such a rarity, because she's looking around and seeing all of these siblings, and she has all these cousins, and she's probably thinking, like, what the heck is going on here? Like, why am I all by myself? And little that she had a sister all of these years. And that was a really big piece of my story too. And myself growing up as an only child and always wanting a sibling and finding out about one another and us connecting was really an incredible experience. And having the opportunity to continue a relationship with her and talk to her every day is pretty remarkable. We utilize tools like Google Translate, and we'll Facebook message back and forth, and can be a little clunky at times, but it's nice.
Are you using Romanian, or is there another language that you two use?
So I'm using Romanian. They speak Romanian, but then they also do speak the dialect of Romani, excuse me, which is the Gypsy language that they communicate in.
Right. How interesting, right? I bet that's not so easily found on Google's Translate, just a guess.
Romani is definitely a lot harder. I was able to pick up a little Romanian on my own, but yes, no, Romani is definitely a different different tackle. But speaking on the cultural note too, when I went there, I learned that arranged marriages are still practiced today. My birth mother, she cannot read or write. Education was really not something that was
accessible.
Right. It wasn't accessible. It wasn't something that was really placed with grave importance for a woman to have an education. The woman's job was really to take care of the husband, take care of the kids, stay at home. The women were very, suppressed when I went there. I got a couple of times, I was asked actually when I was there, does your husband beat you? As if that was, a typical question. Sure. And, I was in such shock at first. I was like, no, of course my husband doesn't beat me. Like, I wouldn't be married to him if he beat me. Like, what kind of question is that? But then, really taking a step back and listening and kind of realizing that's part of everyday life for them. That's not something that is so uncommon. So there was really a lot of cultural differences and things that I learned about that was very eye-opening for me.
Well, here you were, you're a mother and you're an author or a soon-to-be author, and you were living a very totally different life. So how did you manage all that? You had 2 children as you were writing the book.
Yep.
So a lot of juggling. I guess you had a lot of support from your family.
Yes, I have had a lot of support. And it's been a process too with my mother. You know, it wasn't very easy for her to learn that, you know, I wanted to learn more about my birth family and my roots. And it was a very difficult conversation for us to have, as it is with many adoptees and their parents. You know, many parents have this tendency to feel a sense of rejection or abandonment, when really it has nothing to do with them at all, right? It really just has to do with wanting to learn more about where you came from and wanting to, just filling that, you know, filling that void. And, you know, that actually brings me to, there's actually a little excerpt that I'd love to read for you guys from my book that actually talks about that day where I was in Romania, and I was actually visiting some of the sites that were relevant to my adoption. And it was such a fulfilling experience for me. So I'd love to share that with you. Bear with me 1 second. Let me on that. Okay. As we drove, I became less tense and was looking forward to seeing some of the sights. Our first stop was Arad, where we found parking on the congested, narrow streets and landed right in front of the courthouse. It was a pretty beige 3-story building with white columns and capital gold letters across it. As I stood in front of the courthouse and had my photo taken, I imagined what that day must have been like for my parents. I pictured them walking in, thinking, the day we have been waiting for has finally come, knowing that they were only steps away from having a family. The next stop was the maternity hospital of Arad, the place where I was born. I could not walk up to it like the courthouse because there was a fence around the perimeter of the building. But from a distance, I saw the large white building with many square framed windows. And as I looked at it, I pictured Daniela going into labor and holding me for the first time. I could see her looking at me with a lot of love in her heart, the same way she had looked at me many times on this trip. I could only imagine the level of stress she was under when she had me, thinking of having to raise 2 children on her own. I wondered if the stress she felt outweighed the happiness and what was going through her head when she took me home that day. So that's just a little bit that I wanted to share with you. And, you know, really seeing those sites meant the world to me. You know, for just your average person, thinking about the hospital where you were born in may not be something that's that exciting or of interest to you. But for an adoptee, seeing the place where you were born and where everything started was just such a rewarding experience. And it just meant so much to me to have that chance to see that in person. So yeah, that was really amazing. And I actually have a photo, which I can share with you guys, a photo of, it's a side-by-side photo of my parents standing in front of the courthouse all those years later, and then me standing in front of it not long ago. So here, I'll share my screen with you guys so you could see that. Can you guys see that?
Yes, it's great.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool to stand right in front of that same spot that my parents got to stand in front of. And while we're sharing photos, there's some other photos that I can share with you as well. So this photo was actually the very first meeting. That was the first time that I saw my birth mother all these years later in person. I'll never forget, I was at the hotel where I was staying in Arad, and All of a sudden, the whole family was outside. I had originally thought it was just going to be my birth mother and my birth sister, and then found out that it was going to also be their spouses, their children, and all of these other people. So that number of people grew very quickly, and I was a little intimidated at first, but it turned out to be a really special experience. And, she ran in and she kind of like held my face, and we had this moment, and she just said, Adriana, Adriana, over and over again with tears streaming down her face. And Adriana, my birth name. And they actually addressed me as Adriana the whole trip, which was really different.
I can't see the photo. Are you trying to show that photo? Because I still see the first photo. We're seeing the courthouse photo.
Oh, you're not seeing the other photo? No.
I'm not.
Let's try that again. Sorry
All you
about
have to do is stop sharing and then share again.
that.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Here, let me stop sharing.
I know that because that's visual expertise.
Let's try that. How's that?
Oh,
wow.
Sorry about that. Yes. So that was that very first moment where she rushed in and she was just saying my name, Adriana, over and over again. And it was a really beautiful moment that we shared. And actually,
Who was taking the photo?
so there was a gentleman by the name of Danny, and he was actually the one who conducted my birth family search for me. And he also was my tour guide and translator for my trip, my reunion. So he was really with me throughout the whole process, which was incredible. Couldn't have done it without him. And here's a close up. Can you still see this, or do I need to reshare?
Yes,
we
can.
see. We can see it. Oh.
Wow, that's her as a baby.
Actually, the first photo that I've ever seen. That's the youngest photo that I have of myself. I'm 2 this. My birth mother is holding me. And then to the right is obviously all those years later when we were in reunion.
Wow.
Yeah. I still have such a hard time recognizing that little girl to the left and realizing that that's me.
That 18 months, baby lost. Oh.
And what other photos do I have to share with you? Here, this is actually something cool that I could share with you guys. So this is a really moving photo for me. Many adoptees will tell you that adoption is trauma, really from the very beginning. And the reason why adoption is trauma is because that separation from your birth parent is a very traumatic event. And some people carry that with them for their entire lives. I really didn't understand what any of that meant until I found this photo. Because you could see here how terrified I am. I had just experienced that trauma of being separated from the only home that I knew, the only people that I knew. And here my mother is the first day that we're meeting, and you could just feel the intensity in her embrace and how much she just wants to love me, and she wants me to love her, and she just has so much to give me. And it's a really powerful photo, I think. I think it's really telling. And as you can see here, I just write, this is the first time my parents met me in this photo. My mother tried to show me love, but I was not ready to receive it. This image is so heartbreaking for so many reasons. You can feel the intensity in my mother's embrace. She has waited her whole life for this moment. She has so much love to give. I am terrified. I had just experienced a life-changing trauma. I was separated from my birth mother, the only family and home I ever knew. My whole world is about to change. If I had the chance to speak to my 2-year-old self in this photo, I would say, you are going to be adopted by a loving family who is going to give you the world. They are going to give you a life filled with love and happiness and opportunities that would be a mere dream if you were to stay in Romania. One day you'll return to this place you once called home. It will no longer be familiar, but you will reunite with your birth mother and your family and get a glimpse of what your life would have been. this is actually something I submitted in honor of National Adoption Awareness Month to this organization. So I wanted to share that with you as well.
Do you have any memories from there?
I don't
And
know.
not any language memories either.
I don't. I was told by my parents that I did speak, I was speaking Romanian and I was speaking Romani when I came here to the States, but I have no recollection whatsoever of any of that. What else can I show you guys? This photo, I love this photo. This woman, she was so adorable. When I went there, I had the chance to meet Grandma Flore. She was 92 here. This was actually in my book. I wrote, this adorable petite woman at age 92 was losing her hearing and her eyesight. And yet when I came in and they told her who I was, she took my hand in the sweetest way when I sat beside her. It was like Flore remembered me. And I really felt that. I really felt, when I was there, how much my adoption impacted so many people. I was told that after my adoption took place that people were mourning me for a period of time, and everyone had such a hard time after I had left, and relatives actually named their children after me, Adriana, in memory of me. And even more remarkable was that I learned that my sister Monica named one of her daughters Adriana before she even realized that she had a sister, and she didn't even know that all of these years she named her daughter after me.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So that was a pretty cool thing also. And finally, I can also share with you all a video that I have. This video is really special because this video is when my birth mother presented a really special, a really special gift to me. She presented this traditional Roma outfit to me, and she's dressing me in it, and you can just tell the amount of joy that she is getting by presenting it to me and dressing me in it. So I'll play that for you now. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Let me make it bigger.
Daniela, spune-ne un pic acum ce facem noi aici. Ne bucurăm de venirea lui Adriana.
Adriana, da.
Și ce pregătești acolo? Ce ai aici?
Uite, aici am țăgănești o rochiță așa faină.
Da. Și o îmbraci acum în rochia țigănească? Foarte frumos.
Sar de pe Măriana.
Tell her maybe I shouldn't have eaten so much.
Zice, speră că poate nu ar fi trebuit să mănânce prea mult ca să îi rochița.
Adriana,
We'll make it fit.
Potrivește cumva.
numai că
Fie bine, decât a nu
are să îi facă mai scurtă dacă vrea.
Lasă că
Mai
e.
scurtă, să fie mai scurtă dacă nu.
You can make it a bit shorter if necessary.
How does it look?
Look, put the shot. Trebuie și ăla, șalul. Învățat-o cum să și-l pun acolo.
Și că nu poți mică când iau dată, baticul.
Tot baticul, dacă nu pot.
Do I look pretty?
Ce arăt frumos?
Da.
Da. Yes.
Și n-am mai și luat căcutul.
Și în cap. Sigur, ca să
Okay.
îi place.
It makes you
Să
happy.
aibă experiența complet.
Uite așa. Ui, să cărăm să soi la oară. Păpușa. Păpușici. N-am mai și luat.
You look like a dog. You look like a dog, she
Oh
said.
God.
Toy.
Well, Pusha. It's
Așa
dog.
să faci așa la Diana.
This is how the dress, the costume of the Roma.
Take a picture of me and that's
Now this was a video.
Poți să spui acum.
I love watching that. I really do, because, you know, just having met my birth mother, she wasn't a woman who smiled very much. Even on the trip, I had to keep saying, you know, smile, smile, I want to see you smiling. But when she put that outfit on me and she was dressing me in it, she lit up, and it was so amazing. And it made me feel so good that it brought her, you know, happiness to do that.
It's very moving. It's very beautiful. Wow. So meaningful, isn't it?
Yes, it
I
really
just
was.
think when I was watching her dress you, I was thinking she must be thinking too how she used to dress. She was a baby. Very, very touching.
And you got a lot of presents, you said in the book, from them, right? They gave you a lot of things to take home.
Yes. Oh my goodness. It was like the long lost Adriana had returned home. They were just celebrating me from the second that I, you know, stepped foot in their house till I left. I remember leaving the airport. They brought more gifts at the airport. I could barely close my suitcase as it was. I was already like way over paying God knows what for my suitcase. And they're bringing more gifts. And I had to like very politely say, I can't fit anymore. They just wanted to keep giving me. And they even had a cake made of my entire family on it that said, welcome home, Adriana. They actually had a cake made, which I couldn't believe. Let me see if I can find that photo really quickly for you, because that I couldn't believe it when they brought out this cake. They were making all of this food, and I was the only one eating, of course, because I'm just a nervous eater. So whenever I'm nervous or feeling any emotion, I just go to eating. And all of a sudden they're like, no, stop eating. We have to bring out something special for you. And I was like, what? Okay. And then all of a sudden they bring this out. I was like, oh my goodness, you had a whole cake made? That's amazing. That was right after my second was born, Brooke. And they just pulled that photo off of Facebook or something. And it said in Romanian, welcome home, Adriana. So, yeah, it was pretty amazing. It was very amazing.
When you went, did you bring them things too, Yael?
Yes, thank you for reminding me of that. Yes. You know, it was funny. One thing that I really wanted to do was to create a photo album for my birth mother, so that she could really see what my life was like, you know, all of the highlights of my life, and really just have this to keep and look at and realize that, you know, the decision that she made was, while it was a really difficult decision, it was a good decision, and it gave me this really amazing life. So I had made this photo album for her. And, you know, it's funny on the note of pictures too, because I was recently talking about this with my sister Monica, because we don't have any pictures of us as babies or anything. Even Monica has no pictures. And it was just because they didn't have a camera or anything like that. And the earliest photo that I have is the one that I showed you at age 2. So I'll never get to see a baby photo or anything like that. And even when I was at their house, you know, they really didn't have a lot of photos all over. You know, I feel like here it's so traditional. Like when you walk into somebody's house, you see like all the kids, all the families, there's photos everywhere you turn. At least in my house there is. So I thought that was kind of interesting that they didn't have a whole lot of photos displayed anywhere. So I think that was a really special gift for her. And then I brought little things for Monica and the grandmother, and, you know, little things for everyone in the immediate family. I wanted to just have a little something for them. So, but the photo album was definitely the really special gift that I took time, and I put a lot of effort into that for her. And I know she appreciated that. So
I thought it was really interesting how you referred to many of the people in the family. The woman who would have been my aunt, not my aunt or my birth aunt or whatever. So, I mean, birth mother might be a little too close for that, but I hadn't heard, I know a lot of families who have adopted, and I hadn't heard that before, and it resonated.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess even like with the grandmother, I always like thought it's like she would have been my grandmother. Didn't know how else to put it. But yeah, there's so many of them. There's just so many relatives, and it was really great that first meeting, because my birth mother, Daniela, said to me, like, do you mind please coming to my house, because my sister is there and she's leaving in the morning and she remembers you when you were little. She used to do your hair and she used to care for you. It would mean the world to her to just meet you. So she did that video, and she would have been my aunt. And it was just like the way she looked at me, and it was like they remembered me so vividly, like no time had passed.
And there were people that reached out to you right over, was it over Facebook, that said that like wanted to contact you?
Yes, that was a very interesting experience. So as I went back to the hotel that night, I'm packing, I'm leaving the next morning. All of a sudden my phone starts blowing up and I'm like, what is going on here? So I'm looking and I see a text. Hi, my name is so-and-so. I would have been your first cousin. I'm so glad that you made the trip back and you reconnected with your birth mother. Hi, I'm so-and-so. I would have been your other cousin. Like, oh, I've heard stories of you my entire life. Like all of a sudden I was just getting all of these text messages from people who just, it was like the word had gotten out. Adriana has returned to Romania, and all of a sudden all these relatives were just trying to reach out to me. And it was really nice. Like it felt like all of a sudden, like I had this like really big family, and everyone was just trying to get to know me and wanted to connect with me. And it made me feel special. And it was actually really heartwarming. So it was wild. It was very strange to get all of these messages, but it was in a good way. It was definitely a nice feeling. So
how is the family doing in Romania? Sorry for not appearing. I'm in bad light. This is David Brown.
Hi, David. How are they doing? Life is still very difficult for them. And that was also a very difficult thing for me to kind of process while I was there, and then also returning home from my trip, because I guess I thought that, all of this time had passed. Maybe their lives would have been a little easier, or maybe their lives would have improved, since she had put me up for adoption. And yes, I would say, like, in some aspects, her life did improve. She's now married to a husband who is not abusive, and, she now has a house. And there are definitely some things that are better in her life, but her life overall is still very difficult. She still from time to time goes to France and she begs for money. They still really struggle financially, and it's very difficult for them. One thing in my story that I had a really hard time accepting was that she didn't have an indoor toilet. For those of you who read my book, there's that scene that I talk about where I use the restroom in my sister Monica's house, and I open the door and my birth mother's standing right there, and she points to the toilet and she just goes, "Toilet? Me no toilet." And I didn't think I understood her correctly. I was like, did she just tell me that she doesn't have a toilet? And I asked Danny, when we had left, is that possible? Like, does she not have a toilet? Did I understand that correctly? And he said, yes, it's very possible. Like, many people in these remote villages do not have indoor toilets. And that was something that really ate me alive for a long time when I came back. And I kind of told myself, I was like, I don't know logistically how we're going to make this happen, but I'm going to make sure that she has a toilet, because she needs to have a toilet. So I had called Danny and we made arrangements, and I had sent her some money so that she could put in a toilet. So she sent me pictures of some of the progress. I haven't gotten the full completed project yet, but she was working on putting one in, and that really made me feel good that I could do something to improve her life in some way. So I was really happy to do that for her.
Were you able to like send your book to like anyone of your like birth family?
A relative actually who speaks English, because so many of them don't speak English. And it is actually available in many different languages. So I'm actually not sure. Is it available in Romanian? I'm not sure. But it's available in so many different languages. They probably could pick it up. And I know one relative did read it. So I'm sure she sent it to everyone, because once someone in the family has something, 2 seconds later everyone has it. So yeah, I'm sure that they did read it. Nobody has said anything to me aside from her saying that she really did enjoy the book. But I do like to see from time to time, my sister will join like a live talk that I'm doing, or, I'll see that she always sees what I'm doing and she always comments and likes it. And, she shows support in that way, which is really nice. So yeah.
That's great. Does anyone have any final questions or anything along those lines? Or want to say anything?
I just want to thank you. I think it's just fantastic that you're sharing this. And it's what a beautiful story, but also how you're not only connecting with them, but giving back. That interchange, you making the book for her. How precious. Here they are remembering you all these years, and you're alive in their memories, right? Really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for coming to talk to our library community.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure speaking to all of you, and definitely feel free to reach out to me. Let me know what you think of the book once you finished it. Feel free to write a review online. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
And thank you. Yeah, thank you all for coming. And thank you so much, Yael. I really appreciate it. It's so nice to hear your story, and your book is beautiful. And it will be available tomorrow. It'll be on the shelf on the new biographies. So
thank you so much for great speaking with all of you.
Bye-bye.